Imagine a drug so powerful it enslaved an empire, destroyed millions of lives, and brought nations to war. This isn't fiction, this is history. Welcome to the chilling tale of the Opium Wars, where greed, addiction, and power collided with devastating consequences. Picture a world where morality is just an inconvenience, where lives are measured in profit margins and suffering is an acceptable cost. A world where addiction becomes a product, a weapon of mass destruction dressed as commerce. Welcome to the 19th century, an era when the British Empire stretched its claws across the globe, its grip unrelenting, its ambition insatiable. Among its many dark ventures, none was as diabolical or as damning as the trade in opium. Stay with us until the end of this video, where we'll uncover the most captivating cinematic portrayals of the Opium Wars, films that breathe life into the shadows, weaving haunting tales of addiction, greed, and devastation. As with all horrors, this tale begins with ambition. The British East India Company, a monstrous corporate beast cloaked in bureaucracy and greed, ruled over millions with cold, calculated efficiency. It took the fertile lands of India and planted seeds of poison, forcing farmers to abandon their food crops for opium poppies. These blood-red flowers consumed the land, draining its lifeblood to feed a machine of empire. But India was only the beginning. The real prize, the ultimate target, lay further east, in the sprawling empire of China, a nation that would soon be ensnared in a web of deceit, addiction, and ruin. China, a land of silk, porcelain, and tea. The British craved these treasures with a near-religious fervor, their obsession consuming every corner of their empire. But the Chinese had no need for British goods. The empire faced a trade imbalance so vast it threatened its very foundation. And so the British found their solution, not in diplomacy, but in corruption. Opium, a drug that could corrode minds, enslave bodies, and bring any empire to its knees. It was not a commodity. It was a weapon. With chilling precision, the British East India Company flooded China with opium cultivated in India. This was no mere trade. It was psychological warfare. Addiction crept like a shadow through the cities, the villages, and the countryside. Smoky dens emerged, filled with the hollowed faces of fathers, brothers, and sons who once stood proud. The drug didn't just destroy bodies, it devoured souls. Families disintegrated, children became orphans, and communities were hollowed out, one puff at a time. And yet, for the merchants, this was not tragedy, it was triumph. Profits surged, the coffers overflowed, and the architects of this misery stood victorious. But in the darkened corners of opium dens, whispers began to stir. Whispers of despair, whispers of anger, whispers of a crumbling empire and the vengeance it might unleash. The opium trade wasn't driven by governments alone. It was a business, and where there's profit, there are merchants. At the heart of this dark enterprise stood Jardine Matheson and Company, a trading firm born in the shadowed harbors of Hong Kong. William Jardine and James Matheson were not merely traders. They were master manipulators, orchestrators of addiction. With chilling precision, they lobbied the British government to protect their trade, wielding influence like a weapon. And then there were the Sassoons, the so-called Rothschilds of the East. Their empire was not built on gold or industry, but on addiction. They wove their fortunes into the fabric of Asia's trade networks, their wealth growing in lockstep with the misery of millions. For these merchants, addiction was not a tragedy, but a tool, a scalpel with which they carved their empires. They weren't just poisoning nations, they were enslaving them. Each shipment of opium was another link in a chain that tightened around the throats of the powerless. The merchants didn't merely crave wealth, they craved dominion, their hunger insatiable, their ambition monstrous. But ask yourself this, my friends, how much power would you trade for a clear conscience? Would you look into the eyes of the addicted and broken and still count your coins? For these merchants, the answer was simple. Profit first, humanity forgotten. China did not submit quietly. The Qing dynasty fought back, led by Commissioner Lin Zexu, a man determined to exorcise the poison that was devouring his people. He destroyed massive stockpiles of opium in a desperate act of defiance. For a moment, hope flickered, but hope is fragile, and in this tale, it was no match for the darkness of greed. The British government, with merchants like Jardine Matheson whispering in its ears, responded with war. Not a war of honor or necessity, but a war for profit. In 1839, the First Opium War erupted. The British Navy unleashed its fury, annihilating Chinese resistance with terrifying hate. Villages burned, rivers ran red, and the cries of the dying echoed through smoke-filled skies. The Treaty of Nanking, signed in 1842, was a cruel mockery of peace. It forced China to legalize the opium trade, cede Hong Kong to the British Empire, and pay staggering reparations. The poison would continue to flow, unstoppable and insatiable. The Second Opium War followed, a bloody encore to an already grotesque performance. By the end, China was a shattered land, its sovereignty reduced to ashes, its people enslaved by addiction. The merchants of death had won. In Chinese history, the period encompassing the Opium Wars and the subsequent foreign domination is commonly referred to the century of humiliation. Before we go deeper, let me ask, do the shadows of history grip your soul? If you wish to uncover more of these dark truths, like this video and subscribe to our channel. Let the darkness guide you. There are more stories to tell, and the shadows are never silent. Let's turn our gaze to the victims of this darkness. In China, millions fell to opium's grip. Their bodies withered, their minds eroded, their lives extinguished by the drug's insidious embrace. Families disintegrated. Entire communities became ghostly shells of their former selves. The Qing dynasty, a once mighty empire, was reduced to a hollow spectre, its power devoured by the very poison it sought to banish. And what of India? The farmers who toiled to grow this cursed crop were starved of their own livelihoods. Famine swept through the land, leaving villages in ruins and fields littered with corpses. All the while, the British East India Company counted its profits, indifferent to the suffering it had wrought. But the cruelest legacy of all was the silence. The voices of the victims erased, their stories buried beneath golden monuments to greed, their pain forgotten, their cries unheard, their lives reduced to footnotes in a history written by the victors. The shadows of the Opium Wars stretch into the present, where addiction and exploitation still thrive in new forms. Consider the opioid crisis, a tragedy born of the same greed. Pharmaceutical companies became the new merchants of poison. They peddled opioids with calculated lies, downplaying their dangers and fueling an epidemic that has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. The fentanyl crisis in the United States eerily mirrors the Opium Wars, with much of the drug or its precursors linked to China, leading some to view it as a grim reversal of history, where the roles of oppressor and victim have flipped. This modern epidemic echoes the devastation of 19th century addiction, as greed once again fuels destruction, hollowing communities and leaving societies to bear the scars. Could this crisis represent a form of quiet retaliation, a shadowy echo of past injustices? The modern drug trade perpetuates the cycle of addiction and destruction. Global cartels exploit vulnerable populations, spreading heroin, fentanyl, and other deadly substances. Corruption, much like during the Opium Wars, facilitates this devastation as governments and institutions often turn a blind eye or become complicit in the trade. What can we learn from this tale? Perhaps this: when profit becomes the sole measure of success, humanity is always the first casualty. The merchants of poison may change their methods, but their motives remain the same. From opium to modern crises like fentanyl and opioids, the cycle of greed and exploitation continues, leaving devastation in its wake. Yet there is hope. The future lies in our hands. By confronting the shadows and refusing to let history repeat itself, we can forge a path free from greed's grip. The shadows may linger, but they are not insurmountable. The shadows on screen. Chinese cinemas. Reflection of the Opium Wars. Jijin's The Opium War, 1997, portrays Commissioner Lin Zexu's defiance against British merchants, with sweeping visuals of opium dens and war-torn harbors exposing the nightmare of addiction and imperialism. The 1959 classic Lin Zexu, directed by Zheng Junli, dives deeper into his moral struggles, using stark black and white imagery to depict eerie opium dens where smoke curls like restless ghosts, symbolizing a hero's battle against insurmountable darkness. Li Hanxiang's burning of the Imperial Palace, 1983, shifts focus to the Second Opium War, vividly portraying the fiery destruction of the old Summer Palace, a symbol of cultural devastation mirroring the haze of addiction and the shadows of exploitation. Together, these films illuminate the human cost of the wars, revealing the scars left by greed and addiction that linger like an ancient curse. And so, dear friends, we close this chapter of history, a story written in blood, in suffering, in shadows. The Opium Wars may have ended, but their legacy endures. It watches from the corners of history, waiting for us to see it, to acknowledge it, to learn from it. Thank you for joining me tonight. Now, I want to hear from you. If you lived in this era, what role do you think you'd play? Would you resist the shadows, or would their whispers tempt you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's uncover the truths together. Until next time, stay vigilant. The shadows are listening.